All right, AP World History students, here we go. Day one of e-learning. I don't know where you are right now. I'm here in our classroom. It's empty. It feels strange, I will say. But I have a plan. We'll talk about that plan in a second. And I believe you guys are the kind of students who are going to be able to do great in this. So let's talk specifics, okay? I think your first question for many of you is about the national exam. We did get a bit of information over the weekend from the College Board, so that information's here. So I would say right now we're still planning on taking the test as scheduled. If we don't have to change that, I don't want to change that. That date works well for our school calendar. I believe we're still going to be able to be ready for it. Again, nobody knows how long or how sizable this disruption is going to be, so we're all just kind of like living in that. But I think that's still like the most likely scenario as we take it as scheduled on May 14. You know, it's going to take some additional prep work perhaps on your part, and I'd say there is just no better excuse to grab your, I don't mean to promote Barron's, maybe you've got the Princeton one, maybe you've got a, you know, whatever you've got, whatever, some third-party review book, but like getting that third-party book out and turning to Unit 7, which is where we're at right now, Global Conflicts, and just spending time in that would be key for you, because these lessons aren't going to be able to go as deep as we would otherwise go. So if you're sort of like reading along in there as we do this, that's perfect for you. There's a possibility they raised about like we could take the late date, and I think that's May 20th. It's always about a week later than the normal exam. We could push it back a week, and I think any school that has closed has permission to do that. It introduces some headaches because that's during our finals for Southwest, but that's a possibility for us, and I promise you we're going to take a careful look at that and see if that's the right move for us. The College Board has also said, you know, also who knows, just like all of us, and maybe it goes pushed back into June. I think they're really hoping to not do that. I'm hoping that that's not the case for us. I mean, truth be told, let's say worst case scenario, let's say we do e-learning for the entire rest of the year. That is not great. You could still be ready, all right? And you also have to recognize students, literally tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of other AP World History students out there are in the exact same situation as us. So we're all floating through this. I am like looking at all kinds of resources. I'll be pointing them your way. So the national exam, I'll just say for right now, we proceed, and all we got to do, we're just going to be faithful to the next step, right? Whatever our next step is up the mountain, we're doing that. For this week, class earlier this week got canceled. This is a traditional schedule here, and I'll say I squeezed in a little bit more here than I will normally on a traditional schedule, and I squeezed in a little bit more for right now because we just got a class session canceled. This is a locomotive that, you know, we can't stop in AP class. And you know, you are AP students, so I squeezed in a little bit more. You can plan when we have Monday traditional schedules through e-learning in the future, if when, right, that it will have a little bit less than what we have today. So there will be homework that's due on Thursday, that's due tomorrow. That's a reading check. Tomorrow's topic will be the Soviet Union, and you'll find all that posted on Classroom starting tomorrow. Our topic, World War I. It kills me that we have to do World War I in one lesson, but we're going to do it because what else can we do? All right. Let me say this, guys. I'm going to grow as a teacher here through this experience because this is different, and this is going to sort of exercise some different muscles for me. You guys as students are going to grow through this. I don't know exactly how. I can't predict that. I just know God will throw roadblocks in our way like this, and we will grow through it. You know, the most important thing is that we're all going to be safer doing this, but we're also going to exercise some new skills here. All right, so let's do World War I, Plan B through e-learning. This chart here of steps leading to war, this is kind of like, I want you to just kind of walk this through mentally. All right, this is where we were at last time. So the nationalism and the imperialist rivalries, the alliance system, the militarism, all those steps we looked at last time, and we started to also kind of feel that sense in our simulation. By the way, that was a good way to finish our last day of regular learning for a while. I'm glad we got to do that. But in our simulation, I think you felt that kind of like rising tension, and today it's going to blow. Right? Today's that moment when like someone strikes a match in the middle of a room filled with gunpowder and the whole thing goes kablooey, and that is an assassination. All an assassination in the southeast corner of Europe. This happens in June 1914 in the city of Sarajevo. Sarajevo is a city that is traditionally the Serbs view Sarajevo as kind of their city, right? Sarajevo is to the Serbs as like Jerusalem is to the Jews. Like it's historically their city, but it's not a part of the small country of Serbia. It's actually sort of in the larger Austro-Hungarian Empire, which is something that Serbian nationalists don't like a lot. It was a Serbian nationalist who assassinated the crown prince, the man who would become emperor of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. His name is Franz Ferdinand. The assassin is an 18-year-old kid. I don't mean to diminish this. He's a murderer. Not only did he murder, by the way, the Archduke, but the Archduke's wife, and then he shot the Archduke's wife in the stomach. She was pregnant. And so this is a catastrophe, right? Because now you have Serbia, which is sort of allied with Russia, and you have Austria-Hungary, which is allied with Germany, and so like this could sort of trigger all sorts of these doomsday scenarios, right? Now Serbia, the country of Serbia is like, whoa, 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 we didn't do that, right? Those are terrorists. That's not our government. And Austria-Hungary says, I don't see a big difference. This is Serbians that did this, and I want to be clear, it was a terrorist. It was a part of a group called the Black Hand. How about that for an ominous-sounding terrorist name? Austria-Hungary does this thing where they kind of turn back to Germany first, and they say, hey, we're going to bring the hammer down on Serbia. You cool if we do that? And everybody understands, like, Serbia is allied with Russia, which is allied with France. Like, what's Austria-Hungary saying is, like, this could get much bigger than just even this. This is big enough, but this could get bigger. And so to Germany, who's kind of calling the shots in this alliance, are you okay with that? And Germany says, go for it. Now, later we found out Germany didn't exactly think that Austria-Hungary was going to be as aggressive as they were, but Germany does kind of give the all clear on this, all right? Austria-Hungary says, all right, here's the deal, Serbia. We don't like that this just happened, and so we give you this like long list of demands that you're going to have to meet here in order to kind of satisfy, like in order to sort of for justice to be done. And Serbia kind of like actually agrees to a whole bunch of those demands, but the ones that they don't agree to are basically the ones that say like Austria-Hungary has the ability to go into Serbia and launch its own, investigations and its own police forces into Serbia, because Serbia is like that turns us into a province of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. We're not going to agree to that. Germany's like sort of over Austria-Hungary's shoulder, kind of like, well, you better, right? And Russia says, hey, back off Serbia, right? Hey, they're going to play ball with you, but some of these steps are too far. And France and England are watching, and everyone's like, oh boy, right? What's going to happen here? And there's a couple weeks of trying to avoid the worst, and then the worst happens. Until everybody declares war on everybody. The order it goes, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. Russia declares war on Austria-Hungary. Track this through in your brain. What do you think the next move is then? Next move is Germany declares war on Russia. So France declares war on Germany, so Germany declares war back on France, and then England declares war on Germany. All right, especially once Germany has started the Schlieffen Plan, right? Because again, as soon as Russia mobilizes its military, then Germany's like, the Schlieffen Plan, go, boom, and we like invade Russia, we invade France through Belgium, and then England jumps in, and it's on, right? Suddenly this huge war is on, right? In that summer, they all declare war on one another. We will note, for the record here, Italy is a bad partner to have in a group project, all right? Italy kind of bails on the Central Powers, and later joined up with the Allied powers. Germany and Austria-Hungary collect two sort of minor partners in Bulgaria, who I don't think is ever going to get referenced. It hasn't been referenced yet in our course, and this is the last time I'm going to reference it. And the Ottoman Empire, who we're about to say goodbye to them. The Ottoman Empire makes a calculation of, hey, maybe this will work. It won't. What World War I becomes really known for is the ferocity and the savageness of the fighting. It's also known for things like trench warfare. It's known for sort of the static fighting, getting stuck in a stalemate, like a stasis. That's not how it always was, all right? At the beginning, in particular, Germany, as part of the Schlieffen Plan, is moving really fast, right? Through Belgium, through France. In fact, the Schlieffen Plan nearly works. France and England are able to sort of launch a major counterattack, and then when that counterattack happens, and now both sides are like using industrial warfare. I mean, now it's like everybody's got machine guns or Maxim guns, right? Now we're all pointing Maxim guns at each other, and they figure out real quick in this fighting in France in that first year, like, oh, this is wicked. This is some savage stuff. Everybody does the sane and sensible thing, which is get some cover. Now, artillery shells can obliterate every tree and building and every kind of cover there, so where are you going to get cover? You're going to, like, dig trenches. Trenches are developed, they're improvised, right? It wasn't the plan going into the war. It's an improvised solution to how deadly the war was becoming. It's totally like a sensible thing. But it's also damaging to the process of the war itself, right? And the thing that makes it damaging is it gets both sides stuck, right? Like, here, to analyze what's happening in this, guys, I want you to think about this. A machine gun is a defensive weapon, all right? It's not an offensive weapon. It's hard to, like, especially in those days, it's hard and unreliable to move it quickly to new places. So it's sort of like you get a machine gun nest set up. Artillery is a major weapon in World War I. That's a defensive weapon. That's not like it moves really fast into a new place and then you're using it to invade. It's like it's there to defend. Barbed wire is like a actually really sneakily important new technology from the American West. And of course what that does is it slows everything up. Barbed wire slows the soldiers down, the machine guns pick them off. All these are defensive technologies. The major offensive technologies of World War II, like aircraft, tanks, even like aircraft carriers, those exist. If they exist in World War I, they exist in kind of like amoebic protozoic forms, like sort of small toy versions that aren't nearly as effective as they would be. World War II is more of an offensive weapon because offensive technologies are there. World War I is like all defensive, and so now each side is like hunkered down in these trenches, and when they sort of come out of the trenches to fight, it is something savage and sick. And the world is now going to get a glimpse of what full-on industrialized warfare looks like. And it does not take long to recognize that, like, guys, when we turn our industrial capacity and industrial innovation on ourselves, we create, well, like this poet says, a sunlit picture of hell. And a lot of these notions of like the enlightened, civilized West, enlightened, civilized European society, people start to become much more cynical about this, right? And it's also interesting to note, guys, if you were in this war, if you're saying, what are we fighting this for? That's a good question. And ask yourself, what would the answer have been? Like, what's this for? What are we fighting for? We talk in our class all the time, like, what's history class for? What's AP World for? If you're in this war needed a deep hope, right? There is no deep hope for World War I. It's just kind of like, well, it just happened. World War I is called a poet's war. In the trenches, soldiers had a lot of time. They could get letters back and forth. I mean, the funny thing is the trenches are in northern France. That's really close to like where the bulk of the French population was. It's really close to England. I mean, soldiers in the trenches could get newspapers like from London that were just 2 or 3 days old many times. So I mean, in a sense, you felt still connected. There was letters and transit going back and forth, and so soldiers were writing a lot in the downtime and in the dead time between battles. And some of the poetry becomes really famous, and it's certainly of a certain type. My favorite example is this. Not a pleasant poem at all, but let's read it. And I want to note the question at the bottom. Do some sourcing analysis. Who do you suppose is the intended audience? I'll read this. The poem is called Dulce et Decorum Est. If you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling from the froth-corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cud of vile, incurable sores on innocent tongues. My friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie, dulce et decorum est pro patria mori. So it's describing victims of a gas attack. Who's his intended audience? I'm not here to listen to you guys talk about it. I'll say the intended audience is probably every person, every teacher, every parent, every social leader, whoever told them. It's good to, war turns boys into men. It's glorious, right? War is sort of the ultimate aim of a nation, right? It's sweet and right to die for your country. Comes to an end. All right, again, in AP world, guys, we know the deal. We need to know causes and we need to know effects. The whole and then this, and then this, and then this inside the war is usually of a lot less significance. So let's talk about the end. The end came suddenly, all right? The United States had joined the war late in the process. We joined, the war starts 1914, ends at the end of 1918. We joined kind of mid-1917. And we had gotten pulled in because of these German U-boat or submarine attacks on our merchant ships, right? We were trying to stay out, but we're also Americans, so we're trying to do business, and that ends up pulling us into this whole thing. So we got pulled in, and so now by 1918, just imagine millions of American soldiers sort of getting dumped in from the Allied side as the Central Powers are weakening. Germany is still pretty strong, but also recognizing the lay of the land is changing here. This is not looking good here now that the Americans are coming in. Back home in Germany, the British blockade of the North Sea had been very effective, and so they're running low on food. I'm not going to make a coronavirus joke here, but some of the stores in Germany are looking a lot worse than some of our stores here, right? And there's a whole bunch of socialist and communist radicals saying it's time for revolution, just like it's happening just like happened in Russia a year ago. I'll teach you about that next time. And Germany, even before the war the fighting has pushed into Germany, the German homeland actually never is touched here. Before that even is allowed to happen, Germany sort of offers a quick surrender. It's like its generals looked at the chessboard and said, I'm looking at every move we've got, and I can play out 4 or 5 moves ahead. None of these involves us winning. And the situation back home is so dire, we might lose our country to communist radicals, and so we just give up right now. And maybe if we give up, the Allies will be nice to us at the peace table. Maybe, cross our fingers, right? So that's sort of the hope. I will say it was long-term kind of culturally damaging that many Germans, especially German radicals and hardcore German nationalists, never saw and felt close up in their own homeland the fact that they had lost the war. That was always kind of an abstraction. They read about in newspapers. It allowed them to kind of conspiratorially blame that on everyone else and say, we didn't lose the war, right? The cowards gave up, or the Jews, or some other kind of conspiratorial thinking. So that brings us to the treaty. The treaty which is misbegotten, the treaty that doesn't work, the treaty that is sort of like a botched treaty on top of a unnecessary or misbegotten war. It's a common consensus today that the Treaty of Versailles failed. I'll say the Allied leaders were not of the same mind, right? On one side you got Woodrow Wilson, the American president, who's a total idealist, right? He's like a progressive reformer who's talking about let's make the world safe for democracy. We're going to make this a war to end all wars. We're going to kind of reform the world so that stuff like this could never happen again. And you have England and France that are kind of more interested in extracting a pound of flesh out of Germany, or more interested in kind of seeing what chips they can scoop up from the table in the manner of old European wars. And so some of the stuff that ends up in the treaty, Germany is made to accept full blame for the war. Most of the worst elements of the war hinge on this one piece, the war guilt clause. Germany, this was all your fault. You were too aggressive at the beginning. You gave Austria-Hungary the blank check. The Schlieffen Plan was nuts. You invaded Belgium and blah, 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 blah. And this was all your fault. And because it's all your fault, you have to pay us back. All right? So we're going to send our accountants and everybody else going through every Allied country and say, tally up every bit of material damage you did, the lives lost, come back with a dollar figure, we'll add them all up, we'll put it on a bill, we'll hand it to Germany and say, time to pay us back, right? Or you got 10 years or 15 years to pay us back. These are called reparations payments. The intention of them isn't really justice, as you can imagine. The intention of them is to cripple Germany's economy. especially in the eyes of France, who says we want to assert ourselves again as the economic power on the continent. We're going to cripple Germany, make sure that they aren't able to do that. We're going to tie them back to the starting block, and we're going to go off and we're going to be racing here in a post-war world. So Germany's new provisional government, which is a mess, and we'll learn about that later, the first order of business for them, this new attempt at democracy, the Kaiser's gone, is accepting guilt for the war, paying reparations payments, and all kinds of Germans are basically never going to accept this. Even Germans who acknowledge we lost the war are going to say a grave injustice is being shoved down our throats here. Germany is told it's going to lose territory. Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire will be basically dismantled. Thanks for playing. It's been fun to have you, Ottoman Empire. You've been around since the 1300s, but bye-bye. England and France look to scoop up a bunch of new colonies. Japan, who had been in the war, says, do we get a bunch of new colonies too? And England and France say, how about we take them instead? And so Japan's going to feel like they were slighted, and they'll feel miffed, and they're not going to like the West now. Woodrow Wilson does get one key piece in, which is an international mediating body called the League of Nations, and that gets included, but it's not really going to work. You can see in this map, Austria-Hungary gets taken apart. There's this principle of self-determination they talked about. Every national group should get its own country. This war started because the Serbs didn't like that there were some Serbs living under Austria-Hungary, so we should split, every nation group in Europe should get its own nation state. And I'll say that sounds neat on a piece of paper. When you're trying to draw lines on a map, it gets really complicated really fast because people don't live in one neat and organized area. And you can even see things like Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia means land of the southern Slavs. That basically means they couldn't figure out where the Serbs were different from the Croats, were different from the Macedonians, were different from ethnic Albanians, and so they just kind of lumped a bunch of them together and said, you figure it out. Ditto for Czechoslovakia, all right? And you'll note a new country gets placed in the map, or it's actually a very old country that's reestablished, the country of Poland. And we say, good news, Poland, you exist. Bad news, you're wedged between Russia and Germany. And in the 20th century, that's not going to be a great story. The Middle East probably gets it even worse. The Ottoman Empire had controlled the Middle East for centuries. During the war, the British, especially the British, were present in the Middle East, and also the French. And they had convinced local Arab peoples, you fight with us against the Ottomans, you get your independence. There's a man who's famous named Lawrence of Arabia who famously rallied Arabs to his cause, and they're fighting and they're overthrowing the Ottoman Empire. And to the Arabs they said, we don't care about your European war, but this is our war for our own independence. But when the war is over, England and France decide that these places are not ready for independence yet. And they say, we have a lot of experience as occupying or colonizing powers. Why don't we take these places as colonies? All right, we'll draw a bunch of borders, and they are arbitrary borders like what happened in Africa. We'll draw a bunch of lines on here. Chop, 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 chop. We will create new countries like Iraq and Syria, Palestine, or what becomes Israel, Lebanon, Jordan. And we'll rule them as mandates. A mandate is not a colony. It's like a temporary colony, all right? Britain or France will hold them and kind of help them to sort of begin forming governmental sort of Republican institutions and get them ready for self-rule. And then when European powers decide they're ready, then they're going to be ready, all right? Arabs were predictably furious about this. Countries like Iraq and Syria were formed in haphazard ways. Iraq combines a Sunni population with a Shiite population with an ethnic Kurdish population. Syria combines ethnic Turks with Arabs. It combines some Sunnis, a bit of Shiites, and some Kurds. And you might know that there's a Syrian civil war right now that is miserable, terrible. Thousands and thousands of refugees trying to get their way out of there. In some part, that civil war is just a result of a country being formed haphazardly. And I'd say Palestine is a whole different sticky mess, and we'll learn about that later, but the British quickly figure out that There's all kinds of Jewish nationalists who say, we want that, that is going to be our homeland, right? Please set that mandate aside for us. And the British are like, okay, that sounds good. And then a whole bunch of Arabs are like, what are you talking about? Why do they get this land? And then everyone's screaming at each other, and we'll circle back to that later in April. So you look at this treaty and you say, this is a failure, all right? This is a fail. It sends Germany down the path of radicalism. Borders that were created were created inconsistently. In the Middle East, it led to widespread resentment and the creation of unstable countries. Japan, who was an allied nation, felt resentful of the other Western powers. The League of Nations also doesn't really work. I mean, we can just go on and on, but this treaty really is a botched job. The League of Nations, why didn't it work? I mean, it might have worked. It's there to kind of like, when a crisis like 1914 happens again, now we've got something to mediate it and organize it. Well, that's not really how it happened, right? The United States decided not to join. Wilson brought the treaty home, showed it to Congress, and the Senate in the United States, led by Republicans, just said, nah, like we don't think we even should have gotten into World War I. And so this seems like something that's going to pull us into a future war. We don't want to do it. And so the United States is probably the strongest economy in the world at this point, and a growing military power, and them sitting it out meant it was kind of a neutered body. It just didn't really work. So that's our story of World War I. I had to go fast. This is a longer flip lesson, longer than I'll normally like to do, so I apologize about that. But that's our situation, all right? So please work on that reading check. I put a bunch of supplemental videos in there if you want to check them out. They're really excellent. But yeah, day one down, guys. We'll do another day tomorrow, and we'll see what happens after spring break. I'll see you guys soon, guys. God bless.